Though sometimes I grow weary when the road's getting long, at each point of my weakness, you make me strong. And when doubt takes over, I remember it's true. I left everything to follow you. To stay safe or to follow, you ask me to choose. But how could I fail when I've got nothing left to lose? Without your call I couldn't make it. It'd be impossible to do, to leave everything and follow you. Everything to follow, everything to follow, everything to follow you. Sacrifice. I gave up my home, but you left paradise. And what you call me to offer has really set me free, 'cause you left everything to be with me. So with joy I embrace a faith that calls me from home. And I will cling to your promise that I am never alone. And with each passing moment, I'll keep hoping it's true. I left everything to follow you. Everything to follow, everything to follow, everything to follow you. Everything to follow, everything to follow, everything to follow you.
This is a reading from John chapter 21. Later on, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples. It was by the Sea of Tiberias, and it happened like this. Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two more of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said, "I'm going fishing." They replied, "We'll come with you." They went out and got into the boat, but caught nothing that night. When it was already light, there stood Jesus on the shore. Though the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus, Jesus called out, "Haven't you caught anything, friends?" And when they answered, "No," he said, "Throw the net out to starboard and you'll find something." So they threw the net out and could not hold it in because of the quantity of fish. The disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." Thank you very much, Jesus, for inviting us during this Easter season to recognize you in the events of our lives, to recognize that you are not far from what we live, far from what we struggle with sometimes, and that you invite us, like Peter, to recognize you because of your actions in our lives. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Welcome to this second Easter session. Today's session is Faith in the Resurrected Christ. And because of the song, and maybe because of the passage, you might get an idea that yes, it's about faith, it's about following. Easter is a liturgical time when we are invited to renew our faith in the risen Lord. It can also be a time when we are challenged to ask ourselves if the event of the resurrection is an event that remains in the past, or if we live its relevance in our lives, in our today. Jesus is alive. That means that he has defeated all the limits we experience in our life. And the biggest of them is death. This reality continues to be relevant because deep within, we all desire to live. The miracle of the resurrection is so deep that even for the disciples who saw the risen Lord, it took them time to fully understand what the resurrection meant for them as the closest friends of Jesus. Today's passage can help us to see in the experience of the disciples our own process of coming to the light of faith. In the passage that I just read, which is from John chapter 21, in the gospel, the disciples were gathered, no longer behind doors, as we were told last week. They were out and about, as we read, no longer paralyzed by fear, but rather doubtful, and no longer excited about the resurrection of the Lord, or it seems. Peter had forgotten the invitation of Jesus to strengthen his brother's faith. Instead, he went back to what he knew best, fishing, catching fish. It may happen also to us. When we begin a new journey, a new path, when things do not go the way we expect, we begin to doubt. And at times we might feel the temptation to go back to the old ways, to the old attitudes. Just as Peter and the disciples, Jesus had left them in charge of his mission of bringing the good news to others. Jesus himself prepared the disciples to continue his very mission. Yet, they might have felt lost and not sure where to start. So the passage says, later on, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples. So it wasn't the first time. It was by the sea. And what we read is that when Peter invited the disciples to go and catch fish, they said, we'll come with you. They were willing to go. Peter was the leader. And because they had to open new ways and move on, they followed him as the leader. All of us, each one of us, in different ways, are leaders. We lead others with our actions, our words, our example. The question is, where do we lead them? You lead your friends who might not be too sure about their faith. You lead your children. You lead those who come to you looking for words of encouragement, words that can help them to make sense of situations. They come to you to find some direction. Peter, like the other disciples, knew that Jesus had risen and had seen him, but he lacked the conviction of his presence with them, with him and with the rest of the disciples. They lacked the light of faith to see Jesus alive, but no longer physically present. The disciples needed the eyes of faith to see Jesus. It is not enough to know that the Lord is risen. It is not enough. That will be a very intellectual faith. I know that the Lord is risen, which is important, but not enough if we want to follow Jesus. All we know about God, about Jesus, with our intellect, needs to become a living experience that moves us to action. Jesus needs to be very much alive in our life. Perhaps the disciples lacked the excitement of being around people, of witnessing the miracles of Jesus, of moving from one place to another, and to having the certainty that they were following someone who knew where he was going. Now it was up to them to figure out what was the next step on the journey, but not alone. And that was something they slowly realized, that the risen Lord was with them, guiding them, going ahead of them. It is not easy to start anew. It is not easy to take risks, to open new ways. Soon the disciples realized that without the Master leading, all their work came to nothing. The passage says that they went out and got into the boat, but caught nothing that night. When Jesus is not in our life, he's not alive in our lives, it is night. There is darkness. Night in John's Gospel is symbolic of lack of faith, lack of understanding, and absence of trust in God. The consequence is clear. The passage says they got nothing, despite their hard work. In the letter to the Hebrews, chapter 11, the author says that only faith can guarantee the blessings that we hope for, or prove the existence of realities that are unseen. Without faith, there is no guarantee that what we hope for will be a reality. And what is our hope as Christians? The resurrection. That is our hope. That is why Easter is so important for us. Without faith, there is no certainty that we, like Jesus, will receive the gift of life. That we are loved by God, and that all our efforts in life and believing in God makes sense because He's faithful to fulfill His promises. Jesus does not promise us that life will be easy. We all know it too well. But what He promises us is that He will be with us, that we will not be alone. He is and will continue to be with us through all the ups and downs of life. Unwillingness and reluctance to trust in God leaves us and many of our friends, even Catholics, wondering if the Lord is risen, if He has risen from the dead, because there is so little to hope for or to look forward to in the future. Without faith, like the disciples, we at times feel defeated by the hard work and the lack of fruits. We feel that despite doing our best, we end up the day empty-handed and tired. Yet, that was not the end for the disciples, and it is neither the end for us. Because the passage continues and says, when it was already light, there stood Jesus on the shore. Though the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus, but He was there and He was standing. Light, in the same way that darkness is symbolic of lack of faith, light is symbolic of faith. What the evangelist wants to highlight is the fact that only when we have faith, we can come close to the Lord, because we are able to recognize Him. The disciples first heard the voice of the Lord, the voice of Jesus, and only after they had witnessed the miracle of the catch, they recognized that it was the Lord. Faith is the process of allowing the words of Jesus to resound in our hearts, to bring light to our understanding so that we can recognize all the events of our life, of our life as the miracles through which God manifests himself and his love for each one of us. Those experiences strengthen our conviction in the reality that Jesus is alive and that he is with us. Faith then becomes experience and not only knowledge. It becomes experience and it reaffirms our knowledge of who God is. The disciples understood at that moment that fishing was something of the past, that Jesus had prepared them for a mission, and they were meant to open new ways. For this, they needed to believe and trust in the presence of the risen Lord anew, no longer physically with them, but the presence of the Lord very strong, very clear next to them. It was not enough for the disciples to have witnessed that the Lord is risen. They needed to believe that now it was their turn to go and help others discover the presence of the risen Lord in their own lives. So the words of Jesus addressed to the disciples are the words he addresses each one of us tonight. When he approached them after they were working so hard and asked them, "Have you caught anything, friends?" This is the question that Jesus is also asking each one of us. Have you caught anything, friend? When Jesus asked the question to the disciples, they were very sincere in their answer. Perhaps because they couldn't hide it, right? And they had to admit that they had caught nothing. They answered with a no. They had worked hard, yet catch no fish. That might be how we feel at times. At that moment, Jesus invited them to try again, to throw the net once more. And so they did. At once, they did what Jesus asked them to do. That is faith. Faith is not only listening to what Jesus says, but doing it. The obedience of the disciples is a clear example of what faith is. They knew about fishing. They had worked hard, but they trusted, even though they were not sure if they will catch any fish because it was already light. They simply did as Jesus said. That is the obedience of faith. When they saw the huge quantity of fish they had caught, the memory of the miracle of the fishes at the beginning of their following of Jesus made the beloved disciple recognize that it was Jesus who was talking to them. Today, Jesus comes to each one of us and invites us to throw the net. Even though we have worked hard and we might have caught no fish, Jesus invites us to throw the net, to try again, to forgive once more, to let go and move on, to believe again, or perhaps to simply let his words comfort us as we read the passages. Maybe we do not need much. Maybe he's not expecting anything from us, simply to let his word resound in our hearts. It is our friendship with the risen Lord that brings us to an ever more mature response in faith to his invitation to welcome his will in our lives. That's why he addressed the disciples as friends, not strangers, not slaves, but friends. Prayer is the time when we come closer to the Lord and recognize him. Prayer is a time to let his word confront our lack of faith. We will be able to recognize him as we develop a friendship of trust, as we learn not only to hear his words, but to commit to put them into practice. His word is always new, and it always brings light to the darkness we may experience sometimes. At the end of the passage, the disciples follow Peter, no longer away from Jesus, but back to him, to share a meal that strengthened them to do Jesus' will. So as we enter in this time of prayer, as we let the words of Jesus touch our hearts, and as we allow him to call us friends, let us read these words and welcome the invitation of Jesus to let the light of faith come into our lives. And perhaps it will be a good time, a good opportunity to discover what is Jesus' invitation for me, for you, for each one of us at this point of our lives, at this point of our journey of faith. So I'm going to share with you passages, and we will have 20 minutes of prayer. I invite you to slowly read the passages and let the words sink in, to let the words of Jesus talk to us and allow him to bring us again to the light. So we come back in 20 minutes to give thanks.